The woman who took the throne. There is a moment, one single, breathless moment, when a man destroys everything he spent his life building. Not with a gun, not with a bad deal, with a champagne glass and a smile aimed at the wrong woman. Tonight, Dante Valenti made that moment in front of every crime lord, every senator's fixer, and every syndicate head on the eastern seaboard. He raised his glass to Camille Laurent, while his wife Elena stood 15 feet away in a room full of people who would never forget what they just witnessed. He thought it was power. He had no idea he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade his wife had been holding for 11 years. If this story already has your pulse up, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's begin. The Hargrove Grand Hotel had 42 floors, a private helipad, and a ballroom that could swallow a city block whole. Every chandelier had been imported from a glassworks in Murano. Every server on the floor tonight had been background checked twice and paid triple rate to smile and keep their mouths shut. The Valenti Foundation Gala was, on paper, a charity event. Proceeds to children's hospitals, a silent auction, a 12-piece orchestra playing standards from the 40s. On paper. In practice, the Hargrove Ballroom on the third Saturday of November was the one night every year when the most dangerous power structures on the East Coast assembled in formal dress and agreed silently to pretend they were civilized. The Bertolucci family held a table near the east wall. The Morrow Syndicate controlled the bar side. 3 independent operators from the Gulf Coast sat near the orchestra pit and didn't talk to anyone. Men who had ordered violence with the same calm they ordered dinner now sipped Barolo and talked about real estate. And at the center of it all, moving through the room like a man who owned the air inside it, was Dante Valenti. He was 51 years old and looked 45. 6'2", silver at the temples, a suit that had been cut in Milan for a body that still trained every morning at 5. He had the kind of face that could be generous or terrifying depending on which way the light hit it, and he had learned a long time ago how to control the light. When Dante walked through a room, people moved, not because they'd been told to, because something animal inside them recognized a predator and made space. He was working the room with the ease of a man who had done this 30 times, stopping at tables, leaning down to exchange words, touching shoulders. His people tracked him with their eyes from various positions around the perimeter. 4 close in, 2 on the door, 3 in the corridor. His head of security, a compact stone-faced man named Reeves, stayed 12 feet back and slightly left. Elena saw all of it. She stood near the north wall beside a floral arrangement the size of a small tree, holding a glass of sparkling water she had no intention of drinking, and she watched her husband work the room the way she had watched him for 11 years. She could read him at distance the way other people read a clock. The set of his jaw, the angle of his shoulders, the specific quality of his smile when he was performing versus when he was actually pleased. Right now, he was performing, which meant he was also concealing something. She had known for 3 weeks. Elena Marcelli Valenti was 44 years old, and she did not look like what she was. She was medium height, with dark hair. She kept pulled back at events like this, and she dressed well but never spectacularly. People at these gatherings tended to look through her. She had learned early that invisibility in a room like this was not a liability. It was the most sophisticated weapon available. She had built her entire position inside the Valenti organization on that principle. But tonight, standing apart from the crowd in a black dress that cost enough to make most people uncomfortable, Elena was not invisible by choice. She was alone because Dante had not brought her to his side when he arrived. He had walked in through the main entrance, nodded to her once across the room, the way you nod to an acquaintance, she thought, not a wife, and proceeded to take a position near the south end of the ballroom, where Camille Laurent was waiting. Elena had seen the woman twice before, once at a meeting 3 years ago that Dante had described as a business introduction, once at an event in Miami that she had found out about through channels Dante didn't know she monitored. Camille was 36, French-educated, with a background in private finance that served as a legitimizing layer for capital that didn't ask many questions about its origins. She was beautiful in a way that required no effort to notice. Dark red dress tonight, hair down, positioned precisely where the room's best light would find her. Elena set her sparkling water on the edge of a passing server's tray and kept watching. Dante reached Camille's side at precisely 8:47. Elena clocked it without checking her watch. She could feel the moment the room's attention shifted, the subtle redistribution of eyes. The people at these events were professionals. They noticed changes in gravitational patterns the way sailors notice changes in weather. Something was happening. Elena moved, not toward Dante, but to a better angle. She positioned herself near the orchestra, where the ambient sound would cover the fact that she was observing rather than socializing, and she waited. At 8:53, Dante Valenti took a champagne glass from a passing tray. He said something to the man beside him. Felix Bertolucci, Elena noted, head of the Bertolucci operation and one of the three most powerful men in the room. Felix nodded. Then Dante raised his glass, and the slight adjustment in his body language sent a signal that moved through the room like a current. Conversations paused. People turned. Dante had the attention of the room when he wanted it. He always had. "We have been coming to this event for 17 years, Dante said. His voice was pitched to carry without shouting. It was a skill. It has been an honor to serve this foundation, and an honor to share that work alongside someone who has carried more weight than she has ever been given credit for." Elena felt something shift in her chest. "Starting this year," Dante said, "I want to be transparent about the person who will be representing our family's future in this work. Someone I trust with the direction we're going and with the relationships that will define the next decade." He extended his glass toward Camille Laurent. The room responded with the careful, measured applause of people who understood exactly what they were witnessing and had decided to keep their reactions private. Elena did not move. She stood near the orchestra with the music softening behind her and watched the faces of the people watching Dante. She saw the calculations running behind polished expressions. She saw the questions forming. She saw one man, Thomas Morrow, the syndicate head, who had known Elena since she was 32 and had negotiated with her directly on 4 separate occasions, turn and look for her specifically. When he found her across the room, his face did something complicated. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds and then looked away. She was not going to give the room the reaction it was waiting for. What Elena felt in that moment was something she had been carefully not feeling for 3 weeks, and she did not allow it to surface now. She had trained herself over 11 years to process anger as information rather than emotion. Whatever burned in her chest right now, and it was burning, she wasn't made of concrete, she would convert to data later, in private, when data was what she needed. Right now, she needed to understand one thing. Why tonight? Why here, in front of every major family on the coast, in front of the people who would carry news of this moment back to their respective operations before midnight? Dante was not impulsive. He did not make public statements without calculating their effect, which meant this announcement, this deliberate, humiliating, unambiguous announcement, was not a mistake. It was a message. She spent the next 40 minutes doing what she always did at these events. She moved through the room and she listened, not to the conversations people were willing to have with her, to the ones they stopped having when she appeared, to the body language of men who had just been told something about the Valenti family's internal structure, to the way certain eyes tracked Camille Laurent differently now, with the specific attention that powerful people give to a person they've just been told to take seriously. By 9:34, Elena had assembled a picture that Dante did not know she was looking at. She was standing near the east corridor entrance holding a fresh glass of water when the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming, total darkness, complete and instant, dropping over the ballroom like something physical. The orchestra cut mid-phrase. For 1 full second, there was almost no sound, the specific silence of several hundred people simultaneously realizing that something was wrong. Then the first blast came from the mezzanine level. It wasn't an explosion. It was a concussive charge, a shaped device designed to create force and disorientation without fire. Elena knew the difference because she had studied the difference years ago with a man who built such devices for a living and who had explained to her, over 3 evenings and a great deal of coffee, exactly what various types of tactical ordnance sounded and felt like. The information had seemed academic at the time. The ballroom erupted. 340 people in formal wear moving in the dark, the initial shock giving way to the particular human chaos of a crowd that cannot see and cannot assess its danger. Screaming at the edges, men shouting, the heavy thudding of something, furniture, bodies, equipment, going over. From the mezzanine, Elena could hear movement. Boots. More than 2. More than 5. She pressed herself flat against the east corridor wall and waited for her eyes to adjust. Across the ballroom, she could see the pale glow of emergency lighting beginning to activate along the floor. Insufficient, disorienting, useful primarily for identifying the exits that several hundred people were now trying to reach simultaneously. Through the movement and noise, she tracked the choreography of the chaos and found it. Armed figures, 4 visible from her position, tactical gear, faces covered, moving with the kind of specific, trained efficiency that didn't belong to opportunists. This was organized. The entry points had been chosen. The timing of the charge had been designed to maximize confusion at a precise moment. Elena took 11 seconds to observe. Then she moved toward the security station at the East Corridor checkpoint. The guard posted there, a young man named Ortega, who Elena had spoken to exactly once 6 months ago at a planning meeting for this event, was pressed against the wall with his earpiece out and his radio in his hand, face pale, trying to get a signal on a channel that was being jammed. "Ortega," Elena said. He looked at her. "Give me your secondary." "Ma'am, I need you to—" "Your secondary radio. The one on your belt, not the earpiece. The channels they're jamming are the primary operations network. Your secondary runs on the backup frequency. Give it to me now." He stared at her for 1 second with the expression of a man deciding whether to trust someone he doesn't fully understand. Then he unclipped the secondary radio from his belt and handed it to her. She switched to channel 11, the emergency backup frequency she had specified during a security infrastructure review 14 months ago. A review that Dante's head of security had attended and that Dante himself had reviewed only briefly before signing off, and pressed the transmit button. "This is Elena Valenti. I'm on channel 11. All units respond." 3 seconds of static. Then, "Copy that. Reeves here. Who is this?" "Elena Valenti. I have a visual on 4 armed contacts entering from the mezzanine level east and west approaches. They are moving toward the floor. Exit points are going to be contested in approximately 90 seconds. A pause. "Mrs. Valenti, lock the loading dock exits. I don't care what anyone is telling you on primary. Loading dock and service corridors are the most vulnerable points right now, and if they have people on the outside, those are the extraction paths. I need units 3 and 4 redirected to the south perimeter immediately. Do you understand me?" Another pause. Shorter. "Copy." What happened next was something Elena would not allow herself to feel anything about until she had time to feel something about it. The security team, trained, professional, loyal to the Valenti name, began responding to her voice. Not because she had authority on paper, because she spoke with the precise, ordered fluency of someone who had built the protocol they were operating from, and in the dark, under fire, that fluency was the only authority that mattered. She moved through the ballroom with the secondary radio, updating positions, rerouting protection teams, identifying the most exposed guests. The older men with mobility issues, the 2 women who were 6 months pregnant, the Bertolucci family's youngest son who was 14 and had been brought tonight as a gesture of normalcy, and vectoring coverage toward them. Her hands were steady, her breathing was controlled. Somewhere in the ballroom she could hear Dante's voice, not his words, just the sound of him trying to manage something he couldn't see clearly and failing to locate the shape of what was happening around him. She found him 8 minutes after the attack began, near the center of the ballroom where the emergency lighting had created a dim gray zone of visibility. He was with Camille Laurent, positioned in front of her physically, one hand extended back to keep her behind him. His 2 closest security men were flanking him. 3 feet away, a man Elena didn't recognize was on the ground, zip-tied, with a security officer kneeling on his back. Dante saw Elena, and something moved across his face that she filed away without analyzing. "You need to move toward the east corridor," Elena said. "There's a secured path to the parking structure. Reeves has units holding it." "Elena, take Camille and go. Reeves knows the route." Dante looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face in years. It was not anger. It was not calculation. It was something raw and more complicated that had no useful function in the current situation. "We are going to talk," he said. "After," Elena said. "Move." He moved. She turned back to the radio, updating Reeves on the central corridor situation, and did not watch Dante leave. She was aware, distantly, that Camille had looked at her as they passed. Looked at her properly, not the polished social glance of a woman who wanted to project confidence, but the genuine, unguarded look of someone who had just seen something they didn't expect and couldn't immediately categorize. Elena didn't have time for that either. It took 22 minutes to fully contain the situation. 4 armed contacts in the ballroom had been secured by security teams responding to her coordinates. 2 others who had attempted to access the service corridors had been intercepted by the units she'd redirected. 1 managed to exit into the hotel's service levels, and that was a problem she noted for later. 1 of the 6 was unaccounted for, and she had a specific feeling about what that meant. When the emergency lighting came fully online and the guests who hadn't already evacuated could see each other again, Elena was standing in the center of the ballroom with Ortega's radio in her hand. The room looked like a formal event that had been hit by a controlled hurricane. Overturned chairs, broken glass, flowers scattered across marble. A woman was sitting on the floor against one of the support columns with her shoes off, talking to a paramedic. 2 of the Bertolucci security men were tending to a third who had taken something to the shoulder. Not a bullet, a piece of the concussive charge ricochet, survivable, painful. Thomas Morrow appeared at Elena's left shoulder. He was 63, with a face like weathered stone, and he had been in dangerous situations his entire adult life. "Your people held it," he said. "They're Dante's people." Morrow looked at her with the flat, honest assessment of a man who doesn't traffic in courtesy. "They were working off your instructions." Elena looked back at the room. "Go find your family. Make sure everyone is accounted for." Elena, she waited. "The attack wasn't random," Morrow said. "That was organized, that was funded, that was planned against this specific event." He paused. "Someone gave them the layout." She had known this since the first 8 seconds. The placement of the entry points, the timing against the primary communications network, the knowledge of which frequency was being used for close-in security. Too precise. Too calibrated. Someone had provided information that did not appear in any publicly accessible record. "I know," she said. "That information would have come from inside." "I know," she said again. Morrow studied her face. "Do you know who?" "Not yet," she said. It was not entirely true. She had a name that had surfaced 3 hours ago, before the event started, when she had reviewed an anomaly in a communication record that she had been tracking for 6 days. She hadn't been certain enough to act on it. The attack had provided additional data points. She was beginning to be certain. Across the room, she saw Dante re-enter through the east corridor with Reeves beside him. His face was composed again, the professional mask back in place, the rawness she'd seen earlier compressed and stored somewhere she wasn't supposed to be able to access. He scanned the room and found her immediately. He began walking toward her. She watched him come, and while she watched, she turned over the thing that had been sitting at the back of her mind since she'd reviewed the communication record earlier. The anomaly. The name attached to the information leak that had provided the attackers with enough intelligence to plan this operation. The name did not belong to an outsider. It belonged to someone who had been inside the Valenti organization for 4 years, someone who attended monthly security reviews, someone who had been present at 3 separate strategy sessions where the protection layout for this specific event had been discussed, someone who was currently standing 12 feet behind Dante Valenti, slightly left, with the flat expression of a man who was watching the wrong person and hoping that was enough. Reeves. She needed 48 more hours to be certain. She needed to be certain before she moved, because if she moved without being certain, she would lose the advantage of being the only person in the room who knew. She looked at Dante arriving in front of her, his jaw tight, his eyes doing the thing they did when he was holding too much at once. "You ran the response," he said. It wasn't a question. "Someone had to." Elena, "Not here," she said. "Not tonight. There are things you need to know, Dante. and there are things I need to verify before I can tell them to you. What I can tell you right now is that the attack was coordinated, it was funded, and the person who provided the layout of this event's security architecture has been inside your organization for at least 4 years. Dante's face shifted. The calculation came on fast, sharp, the intelligence behind the arrogance finally running at full speed. "You know who?" he said. "I have a name," she said. "I need to be certain." "Tell me the name." "No." The word landed between them like something solid. "Elena. If I tell you the name right now, you will act on it before I've finished building the case," she said. "And if you act without the full case, the person behind them, the one who funded this, the one who chose this night for a reason I haven't finished identifying, walks away clean. I will not let that happen." She held his gaze. "I need 48 hours. Dante stared at her. She could see the war in him, the part that was used to being the one who decided things, and the part that had just watched her manage a crisis he couldn't get his hands around. 48 hours, he said. Yes. He held her gaze for a long, tense moment. Then he nodded once. Elena turned back toward the room and found Reeves still in his position, slightly left, watching them both with careful, professional attention. She let her eyes pass over him without slowing. Just another face in a difficult night. But the 48 hours had already started, and the thing she had not told Dante, the thing she was not yet ready to tell him, was that Reeves was not the top of the chain. The leak had a source above him, someone who had fed Reeves the authorization and the incentive, someone who had a specific, calculated reason to want this particular night to end in chaos, someone who had been standing in this room earlier tonight when Dante raised his glass. And now, somewhere in the ruins of the Valenti Foundation Gala, that person was watching Elena Valenti hold a secondary radio and give orders to a security team and recalculating every assumption they had made about how tonight was supposed to go. Because the woman they had built this entire operation around eliminating was still standing, and she was already working. The 48 hours did not go the way Elena planned. She got 4 of them. At 2 in the morning, she was in the study of the Valenti estate. Not the main house, the smaller structure at the north edge of the property that Dante called the office, and that Elena had, over the years, quietly turned into the operational center of everything that actually kept them alive. 2 monitors. A wall of steel filing cabinets that held nothing important, because anything important lived in a server buried under the floor of a room Dante had never entered. She was standing at the counter with a cup of coffee going cold beside her elbow and the communication logs from the last 6 days open on the screen when the door opened without a knock. Dante came in still wearing the pants from his tuxedo and a plain white undershirt, and he had a glass of something amber in his hand that he had clearly already refilled at least once. His eyes were red at the edges, not from drinking, from the specific exhaustion of a man whose entire understanding of his own life had been rearranged in the space of one evening. "Camille's in the East Guest Wing," he said. Elena did not turn around. "I know, I put her there." "You—" He stopped. "You put her there." "Reeves wanted her in the main house. The main house has 3 entry points I can't fully cover with the reduced team we have tonight. The East Guest Wing has 1 door and 1 window, and I have a man on both. If someone comes for her, they come through people I chose." She finally turned. "You wanted her protected. She's protected. You're welcome." Dante set the glass down on the edge of a filing cabinet, hard enough that some of it jumped over the rim. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That thing where you make me feel like an idiot by being reasonable." "You raised a glass to another woman in front of Thomas Morrow and Felix Bertolucci and half the operators on the coast," Elena said, and her voice did not rise, which was worse. "I'm not making you feel like anything. You did that yourself. I'm just the only one in this room who's still working." The words hit him. She watched them hit. There was a version of Dante, the version she'd married 11 years ago, before the empire got big enough to eat the man inside it. That would have said something honest right then. That version was still in there somewhere, buried under 2 decades of learning that the only safe posture was control. What came out instead was the other thing. "You had a name," he said. "6 hours ago you had a name and you wouldn't give it to me. I've been sitting in that house all night thinking about the fact that my wife is holding intelligence about an attack on my family, and she decided I wasn't cleared to hear it. That's exactly what I decided. Why? Because I've watched you make decisions for 11 years, Elena said, and you make good ones about 90% of the time. It's the other 10% that gets people killed. And the other 10% always shows up when you're angry. And right now you are so angry you can barely see. She stepped toward him. I'm not protecting the name from you because I don't trust you, Dante. I'm protecting the name from you because I've seen what you do when someone betrays you, and if you do it too early, we lose the person above him. He went very still. Above who? She hadn't meant to give him that. She was tired. More tired than she'd let herself register, the kind of tired that lived in the joints, and the word had slipped out through a gap in her guard. She saw him catch it. She saw his face change. You said above him, Dante said slowly. Him. You have a specific man, and you're telling me there's someone over him. He set his jaw. It's someone in the house, isn't it? It's someone who was at the gala. Elena said nothing. Elena. His voice dropped, and when Dante's voice dropped, it was more dangerous than when it rose. Is it Reeves? She held her face perfectly flat. 11 years of practice. Not a muscle moved. It was not enough. Dante had spent his whole life reading people who were trying not to be read. It was, in the end, the only real skill the Empire required. The ability to look at a man's stillness and know what the stillness was hiding. He looked at his wife's carefully empty expression, and he read it the way she'd been reading him across ballrooms for a decade, and his face went gray. It's Reeves, he said. Don't. He's had my back for 4 years. He stood next to me at... Dante's hand came up and pressed against his own mouth for a second, hard, like he was physically holding something in. When it came down, his eyes were wet and furious. You're sure? I'm not sure, that's the whole point. That's what the 48 hours are for. I have the communication anomaly, I have the frequency knowledge that shouldn't have leaked, I have his access to the layout. What I don't have is the money trail proving who paid him, and without that we take out the hand and leave the head. She grabbed his forearm, and her grip was harder than he expected. Dante, look at me. If you go out that door and put a bullet in Reeves tonight, we win nothing. We announce to the person who funded this that we know, and they disappear, and they come back in 6 months when we've stopped watching, and next time they don't miss. He was breathing through his nose, slow and ragged, the muscles in his forearm rigid under her hand. She could feel his pulse. It was fast. How long have you known about him? He said. 6 days. The anomaly showed up 6 days ago. I wasn't certain it was him until tonight, when the attack matched the exact security gaps only he had visibility into. 6 days. Dante pulled his arm out of her grip, not violently, but final. You've known there was a traitor in my house for 6 days, and you let me walk into that gala. I let you walk in because I didn't have proof, and because I needed to see what happened, Elena said, and now something in her own voice finally cracked, just at the edges, the fatigue bleeding through. I needed to see who moved, who looked at who was surprised and who wasn't. And I got it, Dante. When the lights went out, I watched Reeves, and Reeves was not surprised. His hand was already moving toward his weapon a full second before the charge went off. He knew. He knew to the second. Dante stared at her. You used the attack, he said. You knew something might happen, and you used it as a test. I didn't know an attack was coming. If I'd known, I'd have stopped it. She held his eyes. But when it came, yes, I used it. Because that's what I do, Dante. I've been doing it for 11 years while you shake hands, and everyone tells you how powerful you are. I'm the one who watches the room. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The monitors hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog she didn't recognize barked twice and stopped. Then Dante said quietly, the announcement. Camille. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the middle distance, at some point on the wall, and his voice had gone strange and flat. Reeves suggested it. Elena's whole body went cold. What did you say? The idea to bring Camille forward, to make it public at the gala, to do it this year, this event, in front of the families. Dante's throat worked. It was Reeves, 6 weeks ago. He said it would consolidate the alliances, that Camille's financial contacts wanted a visible signal that she was inside the structure. that doing it at the gala in front of everyone would lock it in. He looked up at Elena, and his face had come apart entirely now, the mask gone, a 51-year-old man discovering the exact shape of his own stupidity. He told me it would make me look strong. And it put me exactly where they needed me, Elena said softly. Alone, exposed, standing away from you and away from your security detail, in a spot where, when the lights went out, no one would be covering me. The silence that followed was the worst one yet. The attack wasn't aimed at you, Elena said. Morrow already figured that much out at the gala, and he's right, and he's wrong. It wasn't aimed at you, Dante. The humiliation was aimed at you. The public announcement, the erasure of your wife in front of the coast, that was designed to look like your idea, so that when your wife died in the crossfire, no one would think it was anything but a woman who got unlucky standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Reeves fed you the plan that would separate me from protection and make it look like your arrogance did it. She pulled in a breath. The target was me, and you were going to be the one holding the knife without even knowing you were holding it. Dante Valenti sat down. He didn't pull out the chair. He found it with the backs of his knees and lowered into it like something in his legs had stopped working. His hands hung between them. The amber drink sat forgotten on the filing cabinet. I would have, he said, barely audible. If it had worked, I'd have stood over your body and I'd have thought it was random, and I'd have spent the rest of my life not knowing I killed you. His head came up. Who wants you dead badly enough to do all that? Who plans that? That's not one man. That's not Reeves. No, Elena said. It's not Reeves. And she almost told him. She had the shape of it now, had had the shape of it since 3 a.m. of the night before, when the anomaly first surfaced, and she'd traced it back through 2 shell entities to a pattern of movement she recognized, a signature she'd seen before, years ago, in a negotiation Dante didn't know she'd conducted, and a threat she'd neutralized quietly enough that he'd never learned it existed. The person above Reeves was not new. The person above Reeves was old business. It was a debt from her own past coming to collect, and it had chosen to route itself through Dante's pride, because Dante's pride was the softest surface in the entire organization, and everyone who mattered had known it for years. But she didn't tell him, because she still wasn't certain, and because certainty was the only currency that mattered now, and because, and this was the part she would examine later, in the cold when there was time, a small, tired, human part of her was not ready to hand Dante the information that his wife's enemies were his wife's enemies, that she had a life he'd never seen, that the empire he thought he'd built had been standing on a foundation she'd poured in the dark while he slept. I need the rest of the 48 hours, she said instead. I need to trace the money. When I have it, I'll tell you everything, all of it. I promise you that. Dante looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. She almost believed he meant it. He didn't make it 4 more hours before he broke the promise. Elena found out at 6:40 in the morning when Ortega, the young guard from the corridor, who she had, in the space of one night, decided to start trusting, knocked on the office door with his face wrong. Ma'am, he said, you need to come to the main house. Mr. Valenti and Reeves are... He stopped. It's bad. She was already moving. She crossed the dark grounds at a near run, gravel biting through the thin soles of the shoes she hadn't changed out of, the cold morning air burning in her chest. She could hear it before she reached the door. Not shouting, worse than shouting. 2 men talking in the low, tight register of a conversation that was 1 word away from becoming permanent. The main house entryway was a wide marble space with a staircase curving up one side. Dante stood at the base of the stairs in the same white undershirt, and he had a pistol in his hand, and it was not raised, but it was not put away either, hanging at his side with his finger indexed along the frame, in the way a man holds a weapon when he has not yet decided, but is very close to deciding. Reeves stood 6 feet away with his hands loose and open at his sides and his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, and he was watching Dante's gun hand the way a man watches a snake. 2 of the other security men stood back against the wall, frozen, hands nowhere near their own weapons because they did not know which way this was going to break and nobody wanted to be the reason it broke wrong. Dante, Elena said from the doorway. Neither man looked at her. He asked me a question, Reeves said. His voice was steady, too steady. I gave him an honest answer. Now he's pointing a gun at me over 4 years of work. Oh, tell her what you told me, Dante said. His voice had gone somewhere very cold. Tell her the honest answer. Reeves's jaw flexed. I told him I don't know what he's talking about. He told me, Dante said, still not looking away from Reeves, that he was surprised when the lights went out, that he had no advanced knowledge, that his hand went to his weapon because he's a professional and that's what professionals do. A muscle jumped in his cheek. Which is a real good answer, Reeves, real clean. Except my wife was watching you, and my wife says your hand started moving before the charge went off. Not after. Before. The room got very quiet. Elena watched Reeves's face, and for 1/2 of 1 second, so fast that if she had not spent 11 years learning to read exactly this, she saw the thing she needed to see. The flicker. The recalculation. The moment a man realizes that the story he prepared no longer matches the facts in the room and has to decide right now whether to keep lying or change strategy. Reeves changed strategy. His hand did not go for a weapon. That was the first surprise. His hand came up, palm out, and his voice dropped into something almost reasonable. Okay, he said. Okay. Put the gun down and let's talk like men, because you are about to make a mistake you can't take back, and I'm the only one in this house who can keep it from getting worse. Talk, Dante said, not with the gun up. Talk with the gun up, Dante said, or I put it in your knee and you talk from the floor. Elena moved further into the room, slow, her hands visible. Reeves, look at me. He didn't. She said it again, harder. Reeves, look at me, not him. You know how this goes now. You know I have the communication logs. You know I have the frequency trail. The only thing you have left to trade is what's above you, and the window to trade it is closing while that man decides whether to shoot. So I'm going to ask you one time, and your answer is the only thing between you and the floor. Who paid you? For a moment, she thought it might work. She saw Reeves's throat move. She saw the calculation running. The man was smart. He'd always been smart. That was what made him dangerous. And she watched him arrive at the edge of the decision to give up the name. And then his eyes moved. Not to her. Not to Dante. They flicked, for one instant, to the window behind Elena's left shoulder. The tall window that looked out onto the dark front grounds. The window that Elena, in the specific stupid exhaustion of a night without sleep, had not thought about because it was on the interior side of the security perimeter and nothing was supposed to be able to reach it. Reeves's eyes flicked to the window, and something in his face relaxed. Elena understood a full half-second before it happened, which was enough time to move but not enough time to matter. Down! She screamed, and she was already turning, already grabbing for Dante's arm to pull him off the line, and the window came apart. Not shattered, came apart, blown inward in a spray of glass by something fired from the dark outside, and the sound arrived a fraction after the glass, a hard, flat crack that was not a concussion charge this time. That was a rifle. Reeves dropped. Not shot, dropping deliberately, hitting the floor and rolling toward the cover of the staircase in the same motion. A man who had known exactly when the shot was coming because he'd been waiting for the signal that it would. The security men against the wall came off it, weapons out, one of them firing back toward the broken window into the dark, the muzzle flash strobing the marble. Dante was on the ground. Elena had pulled him down and he'd gone, but now he was scrambling, gun up, and she couldn't tell in the noise in the dark whether he'd been hit. Are you hit? She was shouting, hands moving over his shoulder, his chest. Dante, are you hit? No. He was breathing in hard, fast bursts. No, Where's Reeves? Where is he? Reeves was gone. In the 6 seconds of chaos, the window, the return fire, the 2 guards moving toward the breach, Reeves had rolled behind the staircase, and from behind the staircase there was a service door that led to the kitchen, and from the kitchen there was a door to the side grounds, and Reeves knew every one of those doors because Reeves had walked the security perimeter of this house 400 times, and Reeves had planned exactly this. The shot through the window hadn't been meant to kill anyone. It had been meant to create 6 seconds. He's running, Elena said, up on her feet now, her ears ringing, glass crunching under her ruined shoes. "The kitchen door! Someone get to the—" But she already knew it was too late. She could hear, faintly, over the ringing and the shouting, the sound of a vehicle on the far side of the property. An engine that had been idling in the dark and was now moving fast down the service road toward the north gate. He'd had extraction waiting. He'd walked into that entryway with a gun pointed at him, and he had not been afraid, and now she understood why. Because he'd never intended to talk his way out. He'd intended to stall until his people were in position, and the whole conversation, the reasonable voice, the "let's talk like men," had been him buying seconds while a shooter got a line on the window. She had been played. She, who watched the room. She had spent the night so focused on tracing the money above Reeves that she had let Dante corner Reeves face to face, and in doing so had given the man exactly the crisis he needed to trigger his own escape. And Dante had let him. No, not let him. Forced it. Dante had broken his promise, had gone to the main house and confronted Reeves alone at 6 a.m. because Dante's 10% had shown up right on schedule, and now the one man who could have led them to the person above him was in a vehicle heading for the north gate with a rifle team covering his exit. Elena turned on her husband. He was standing now, gun still in his hand, glass in his hair, chest heaving. And on his face was the expression of a man who understood, completely and immediately, exactly what he had just cost them. "I told you," Elena said. Her voice was shaking now, finally. The control gone. Everything she'd been holding since 8:53 the night before coming up her throat all at once. "I told you. 48 hours. I told you the 10% gets people killed, and you couldn't sit still for 4 hours, Dante." "Elena, he's gone." She could hear the vehicle reach the gate, hear a second sharper burst of gunfire from the direction of the north perimeter that meant the gate guards had engaged and, from the way it stopped, had lost. "He's gone. And he was the only threat I had that led to the person who wants me dead. And you handed it to him because you couldn't stand not being the one holding the gun." Dante's face was white. "I'll get him back." "You can't get him back. He had extraction staged inside our own perimeter. Do you understand what that means? It means this wasn't a decision he made this morning when you cornered him. It means he was ready to run at any moment, from any point, because whoever's above him told him the second he was exposed, he burns and runs. Which means—" She stopped. The cold understanding arrived all at once, complete. "Which means what?" Dante said. Elena looked at the broken window, at the glass across the marble, at the 2 guards standing in the ruined entryway with their weapons still up, and the pale gray light of dawn just starting to come up over the grounds outside, and the specific total silence of the north gate now that the shooting had stopped. "It means they were never trying to hide from us for very long," she said slowly. "Reeves was disposable. The gala was disposable. All of it. The humiliation, the attack, the leak. It wasn't a plan to kill me quietly and get away clean. If it were, they'd have kept Reeves in place and denied everything. They burned him. They burned him the second the plan failed, and they extracted him in front of us, loud, obvious, so that we would know." She turned to face Dante fully. "They wanted us to know. They wanted us to see that they can put a shooter inside our perimeter and pull a man out of our own house with us standing right there, and there's nothing we can do about it. This wasn't an escape, it was a message. A message saying what?" Dante said, and his voice had gone very small. Behind them, from the direction of the east guest wing, the guest wing Elena had chosen, the one with 1 door and 1 window and a man on each, Ortega's voice came crackling over the secondary radio, still clipped to Elena's waistband, and it was high and fast and wrong. Ma'am, the East Wing. I've got 2 men down at the East Wing. The door's breached. They came in they used the shooting as cover. We didn't—" A breath. A gunshot, close to the radio, deafening even through the small speaker. Then Ortega again, lower, shaking. "Ma'am, she's gone. Camille's gone. They took her." Elena and Dante looked at each other across the ruined entryway, and in that single frozen second, both of them understood the same thing at the same time, that the shooting at the window had never been about Reeves's escape at all, that Reeves running out the kitchen door had itself been the diversion, the loud, obvious thing designed to pull every armed man in the house toward the front while the real team came in quiet through the east, and that the person above Reeves had just proven, beyond any argument, that they could reach into the very center of the Valenti empire and take whatever they wanted out of it. They had taken Camille. The woman Dante had raised his glass to. The woman he had humiliated his wife to elevate. The woman who was, whatever else she was, now a hostage in the hands of someone who had spent months designing this entire catastrophe, and who had just handed Dante Valenti a choice with no version that didn't cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. Elena's radio crackled once more. A different voice this time. Not Ortega. A voice she didn't know, calm and unhurried, coming through on Channel 11. The backup frequency, the one only the innermost security team was supposed to have, the one Reeves had known. "Mrs. Valenti," the voice said, "you've been very impressive tonight, genuinely. I want you to know I mean that." A pause. "You have the girl's life, and you have your husband's empire, and by the end of the week you are going to have to choose which one of them you get to keep. I'll be in touch." The radio went dead, and Elena Valenti stood in the gray dawn light among the broken glass, with her husband staring at her and two men dead in the East Wing, and no way left to pretend that any part of this was still under her control, and understood that the last exit had just closed behind her. The radio stayed dead for 11 seconds. Elena counted them. It was the thing she did when she needed her hands to stop shaking. She found a number and she held it, and by the time she reached 11, the shaking had converted itself into something she could use. Then she keyed the transmit button. "Ortega, talk to me. You still with me?" Static. Then his voice, thin and wet. "I'm here. I'm hit. My arm. It's not bad. It's the arm. Delgado's dead." "Ma'am, Delgado's dead. They put 2 in him before he cleared his weapon. They were already inside when the front went loud." "How many?" "4, maybe 5. They came through the window. I had a man on. They had a breaching charge. It was quiet. Some kind of quiet charge. We didn't hear it over the shooting at the front." His breath hitched. "They knew. They knew I only had 2 of us on that wing. They came straight for her like they had a map." They had a map. Of course they had a map. Reeves had drawn it. "Stay down. Pressure on the arm. Someone's coming to you." Elena let go of the button and looked at Dante, and Dante was already moving, gun still in his fist, heading for the East Wing, and she got in front of him with a hand flat against his chest. "No," she said. "Get out of my way. There's nothing in that wing but a dead man and a wounded one in an empty room. If you go stand in it, you'll feel better for about 10 seconds, and then you'll be exactly where you are now except further from the office. She's gone, Dante. Running to the room she was taken from doesn't untake her." He looked at her, and for a second she thought he might physically move her out of the way. His chest was rising and falling under her palm in hard, uneven pushes, and his eyes had that specific wildness she'd seen exactly twice before in 11 years, both times right before he did something that cost them. "They have Camille," he said. "I heard the man too. They have Camille because I put her in this house, because I brought her forward, because I stood up in front of the whole coast and—" His voice broke off. His jaw worked. "This is mine. This is on me. I did this." "Yes," Elena said, because lying to him now would be its own kind of cruelty. "Some of it is. Now come to the office and help me get her back, or stand in that hallway and grieve. Pick one. But pick it in the next 5 seconds because that man on the radio just gave us a week, and I don't intend to spend the first hour of it watching you fall apart." Something in the flatness of it reached him. Later, she would think it was the only tone that could have, not comfort, not softness, but the hard, clean sound of a person who was still working when he couldn't. He looked at her for one more second. Then he put the gun in his waistband and followed her across the dark grounds to the office. And neither of them said anything, and the sun came up gray and cold behind them over a house with 2 doors blown open. By 8 in the morning, the office had become a command post. Elena had pulled in the 4 security men she still trusted being a word that had, in the last 10 hours, contracted to a very small circle. And Ortega, whose arm had been cleaned and bound by a doctor Elena kept on a private arrangement, and who had refused, white-faced and stubborn, to go to a hospital. Delgado's body was in the cold room off the garage. Elena had made the calls that needed making so that no one outside the property learned a man had died on Valenti grounds tonight, and the making of those calls had reminded her coldly exactly how much of the machine's quiet infrastructure ran through her and not through Dante. She had the communication logs up on both monitors. She had the frequency trail. She had now a second data set. The breach on the east wing, the timing of it against the diversion at the front, the fact that the strike team had known troop placements down to the man. And she had the voice on Channel 11, which she'd recorded because she recorded everything on Channel 11, a protocol she'd instituted 2 years ago and never told Dante about. She played it back for the room, calm, unhurried. You have the girl's life, and you have your husband's empire, and by the end of the week, you are going to have to choose which one of them you get to keep. Play it again, Dante said. She played it again. He knows your voice, Dante said. He's not talking to me. He's not talking to my security chief. He called you Mrs. Valenti, and he said you'd been impressive, and he handed the choice to you, not me, you. He was standing very still by the window, arms crossed, and the professional was coming back up over the wreckage of the man, which was both a relief and, Elena thought, a warning. This is old business, Elena. You said it last night. Old business. Somebody you crossed a long time ago, back before me, back before I ever knew what you actually were. Elena said nothing. I need the name, Dante said. And this time you don't get to hold it. This time it walked into my house and took a woman out of a room and killed one of my men. This time it's mine too. Give me the name. She had been going to hold it one more day. She had a reason. She still wasn't fully certain. The money trail was 90% there, but not 100. And the last time she'd let Dante move on 90%, they'd lost Reeves. But she looked at his face, and she understood that another day was no longer something she got to have. He had earned the name in blood, whether or not she'd wanted him to pay that price. Marcus Vale, she said. The room was quiet. None of the security men reacted. The name meant nothing to them. Dante frowned. I don't know that name. You wouldn't. He never dealt with your side of the family. He dealt with mine. The part of my life you never asked about, back when you thought I was a lawyer's daughter you'd gotten lucky with. Elena's voice was flat and even, and she kept it that way through effort. 14 years ago, before you, I worked for a man named Aldous Wren. You've heard of Wren? Dante's face changed. Wren's dead. Wren's been dead for 12 years. Yes, he's dead. She held Dante's eyes. He's dead because I made a decision that got him killed. Not directly. I didn't pull a trigger, but I saw a war coming between Wren's people and a rival structure, and I understood that Wren was going to lose it, and I made a choice about which side of the collapse I wanted to be standing on when it landed. She paused. Marcus Vale was Wren's second. He worshipped the old man. And when it all came apart, Vale figured out, correctly, that the woman who'd been Wren's quiet strategist had seen the end coming and had spent 6 months quietly moving herself out of the blast radius instead of warning anyone. He figured out that I chose myself, and he swore in front of witnesses that someday he was going to take everything I built, piece by piece, and make me watch, and then take me last. The silence in the office had weight. I thought he was gone, Elena said. After Wren fell, Vale disappeared. No footprint, no operations, nothing, for over a decade. I checked. Every year for the first 6 years I checked, and there was nothing, and eventually I let myself believe he'd died or given up or found a new life. Her hand flattened on the counter. I was wrong. He didn't die. He spent 12 years doing exactly what I would have done. He went quiet, he built something, and he waited until I'd forgotten to be afraid, and then he came for the thing I love. Dante was staring at her. The thing you love, he repeated slowly. You said the thing you love, not the girl, not Camille. His eyes narrowed. The Empire. He came for the Empire because you love the Empire. I came into your family 11 years ago with nothing to my name that you could see, Elena said, and now there was an edge in it, something she hadn't planned to let out. And I built the protection network and the intelligence structure and the quiet infrastructure that kept you alive through 3 wars you didn't even know were wars, because I stopped them before they started. Yes, Dante. I love it. The only thing I ever built clean without stepping on anyone the way I stepped on Ren. So yes, when Vale wanted to hurt me, he came for it, and he was right that it would work. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, husband and wife, across a room full of men pretending not to listen. Then Ortega, from the corner where he sat cradling his bound arm, said quietly, "Ma'am, if this Vale's been planning 12 years and he got Reeves 4 years ago, how do you know Reeves was the only one?" And Elena went very still. Because it was the right question. It was the question she'd been circling all morning without letting herself land on it. The question that changed the shape of everything. If Marcus Vale had spent 12 years and had the patience to turn her husband's security chief 4 years in advance, then Reeves was not a lucky recruitment. Reeves was one piece of a long, patient, distributed operation. And a man who thought like that, who planned like that, would never, ever build his revenge on a single point of failure. There was someone else. "Pull everyone's file," Elena said. Her voice had dropped. "Everyone in the inner structure. Everyone who's joined in the last 5 years. Financial anomalies, communication patterns, anything." "That's going to take days," one of the security men said. "Then start now." But even as she said it, a colder understanding was moving through her, slow and terrible, because the logic didn't stop at, "There's a second traitor." The logic kept going, and where it went was somewhere she did not want to follow it. Vale had known she was watching Reeves. He'd had to have known. He'd extracted Reeves the instant Reeves was cornered, with an extraction team pre-staged inside the perimeter, which meant Vale had known in near real time that his man was blown. Which meant someone had told him. Someone who knew that Elena had spent the last 6 days building a case against Reeves. Someone who knew about the anomaly, and the frequency trail, and the fact that she was watching. Someone very close. And the number of people who knew Elena was building a case against Reeves was, she realized, standing in her own office at 8 in the morning with her heart going cold, very, very small. It was her. And it was Dante, who she'd told at 2 in the morning. That was the whole list. She turned, slowly, and she looked at her husband. Dante caught it. He caught the look on her face, and his own expression flickered. Confusion first, then, as he traced her logic to the same endpoint, something between hurt and fury. "No," he said. "No. You're not looking at me like that." "Who did you talk to?" Elena said, very quietly. "Between 2 this morning, when I told you about Reeves, and 6 this morning when you cornered him, 4 hours. Who did you talk to in those 4 hours?" "Nobody. I sat in the house and I drank and I—" He stopped. Something moved across his face. "Dante." "I called Camille," he said. The room went absolutely silent. "I called Camille at 4 in the morning," Dante said, and his voice had gone strange, hollowed out as the words came up from wherever he'd been keeping them. "Because I couldn't sleep. Because you'd just told me that I'd been used, that the announcement was a setup, that a woman that Camille had been part of putting my wife in a kill box. And I called her to, I don't even know, to ask her, to hear her voice and figure out if she'd known." His hand came up and pressed against his own forehead. "And I told her that you'd found the leak, that you were building a case against Reeves. I told her because I wanted to see if it landed like a surprise or like a confession, and it landed like a surprise, Elena. She was shocked. She was good," Elena said softly. "She was very, very good." Because it was all coming clear now, all of it. The last piece dropping into the space it had been shaped to fit the whole time. Camille Laurent, with the French education and the private finance background and the capital that didn't ask questions about its origins. Camille, who Reeves had wanted brought forward, who Reeves said her financial contacts wanted made visible inside the structure. Camille, who Dante had been steered toward for reasons no one had examined because Dante's vanity had made the steering feel like his own idea. Camille was not a symbol of Dante's mistake. Camille was Vale's. "She's not a hostage," Elena said, and the words came out of her flat and dead. Dante, listen to me. She's not a hostage. She was never a hostage. They didn't take her tonight. They collected her. The breach on the East Wing, the 2 men down, Delgado dead. That wasn't a kidnapping. That was an exfiltration of their own asset, made to look like a kidnapping, so that you would spend the next week frantic to save her, so that you'd be desperate and off balance and making exactly the kind of 10% decisions I told you get people killed. She could barely get the last of it out. You called her at 4 this morning and told her I was closing on Reeves, and Reeves got extracted at 6. She's the one who told Vale his man was blown. She's the second one. She's been the second one the whole time, and she's been standing next to you at events for 3 years while I looked at the wrong threat. Dante Valenti's face came apart for the second time in 12 hours, and this time there was no mask left to lose. He put his hand out and found the edge of the counter and held it. I called her, he said. Barely a whisper. I gave her the timeline. I told her when. She knew to pull Reeves because He stopped. His eyes were wet and wide and horrified. I did it. Again. I did it again. Yes, Elena said. She didn't have the mercy left to soften it. She was too far past the edge of her own exhaustion, and the betrayal underneath the betrayal had scraped her down to something raw. You did it again. And then Ortega's voice from the corner cutting through the silence, low and urgent. Ma'am, the recording, the voice on channel 11. Play it one more time. Play the end of it. Elena's hand moved to the console. She played it. You have the girl's life, and you have your husband's empire, and by the end of the week you are going to have to choose which one of them you get to keep. I'll be in touch. There, Ortega said. Under it. There's something under his voice at the end. I heard it the first time, and I thought it was static. Elena's blood went cold. She isolated the channel. She stripped the primary voice. And underneath the calm, unhurried words of Marcus Vale, buried in the background of the transmission, faint, just at the edge of audible, there was a second sound. A woman's voice. Close to the microphone. Amused. Camille. Saying quietly to Vale in a tone of easy familiarity that no hostage in the history of the world had ever used with a captor. She heard the whole thing. Watch. She'll figure it out in about a day. She's the smart one. That's the fun part. The recording ended. Nobody in the office moved. And Elena Valenti understood, in that frozen and airless moment, that she had been beaten. Not tonight, not last night at the gala, but slowly, patiently, over 12 years, by a man and a woman who had studied her the way she studied everyone else, who had built the one trap that used her own intelligence as the bait, who had known she would watch the room and had simply made sure that the thing she watched was never the thing that mattered. They had let her be brilliant. They had counted on it. Every move she'd made, reading Reeves at the gala, building the case, protecting Camille in the East Wing where they wanted her, had been a move they'd predicted and used. The strategist who quietly built the Valenti empire had spent the last 24 hours doing exactly what her enemy needed her to do. And now Camille's voice was in her ears. She's the smart one. That's the fun part. And Dante was breaking against the counter, and there were 2 doors blown open on a house full of men who'd follow her orders but couldn't save her. And a week to make a choice that Vale had designed to have no right answer. And the truth landed on Elena Valenti with a weight she felt in her knees. The woman who won by watching could not win this by watching. The strategist who never touched the knife, who stayed in the dark and moved the pieces and kept her hands clean, because keeping her hands clean was the whole architecture of who she'd decided to be after Ren. That woman was going to lose. Vale had built a trap that only that woman would walk into, and she had walked into it every step, exactly on schedule. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to get out of the box Vale had spent 12 years building, she was going to have to become the thing she'd spent 11 years refusing to become. The thing she'd walked away from when she walked away from Ren's collapse. The one who didn't strategize the violence from a safe room but stood in it. The one who chose herself and let the bodies fall and stopped pretending there was a clean version. She looked at her husband breaking against the counter and at the recording still glowing on the monitor, and at the gray dead light coming through the window where the glass used to be. And Elena Marcelli Valenti, for the first time in 11 years, reached into the drawer beneath the counter, past the files and the logs, and the careful architecture of a woman who watched, and closed her hand around the gun she had never once taken out. The gun was a Sig Sauer P226 9mm, and it had been in that drawer for 3 years without ever being touched. Elena had cleaned it once a year and put it back and told herself it was there for emergencies, and had spent 3 years defining emergency in a way that never quite included herself pulling the trigger. She checked the chamber, round-seated, safety off. She put it in the back of her waistband and pulled her jacket over it. Dante watched her do this without saying anything. He was still at the counter, still holding the edge of it, but something had changed in his posture in the last 30 seconds. The collapse pulling back, the man reforming over the wreckage, the way she'd watched him reconstruct himself after every catastrophe in 11 years. It was the thing she'd married him for, once. The capacity to absorb a killing blow and come up moving. "You have a plan," he said. "I have the beginning of one. Tell me." "Vale gave us a week," Elena said. "He didn't give us a week because he's generous. He gave us a week because the choice he wants me to make, the Empire or Camille, only has value if I make it publicly. He wants the families to see. He wants to do to me what he thinks I did to Ren. Let the structure I built watch me burn it to save myself, so that every alliance I've built over 11 years understands that Elena Valenti puts herself first." She moved to the monitor and pulled up the communication logs. "Which means he needs the week too. He needs to set a stage. And that means he's somewhere in the next 72 hours putting pieces in place, which means he's moving, which means he's visible. You can find him. I can find someone who knows where he is." She turned. "The money trail. I had 90% of it before this morning. I need to close the last 10, and I need to do it without using any channel that Camille had access to, which means I'm rebuilding the trace from a clean endpoint." She looked at Ortega. "Can you drive with that arm?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. I need you to take me to a man named Benny Solis. Do you know the Caldwell Warehouse District, south of the rail yards?" "I know it." "Then let's go." Dante pushed off the counter. "I'm coming." "No." "Elena, I need you here," she said, and this time it wasn't tactical. It was true. She held his eyes and let him see that it was true. "I need you holding this house together. If Vale has a second contact in the inner structure beyond Camille and Reeves, and he might, the minute I walk out that door, that contact is going to test the security. I need you here, steady, with your people believing this house is still standing. Can you do that?" A long beat. "Yes," he said. "If I call you on the secondary, channel 11, you answer on the third ring and not before. If I don't call by 6 tonight, you go to Thomas Morrow, not Felix Bertolucci, not your lawyer, not anyone else. Morrow. Tell him everything. He'll know what to do." Dante nodded. He put his hand out, and she looked at it for a second. This hand she'd known for 11 years, the knuckle scar on the index finger from an argument with a dock cleat the second year of their marriage, the calluses he kept from the morning training, and she put her own hand in it for exactly 3 seconds. "Don't get shot," he said. "I'll try." She walked out into the cold morning light with Ortega behind her and did not look back. Benny Solis lived above a tire shop in the Caldwell district in a 2-room apartment that smelled of motor oil and instant coffee and old cigarette smoke. And he had been, at various points in the last 20 years, a wire technician, a money tracer, a low-level intelligence broker, and a man who had once built a financial ghost trail so clean that 3 separate federal investigations had stared directly at it and seen nothing. Elena had found him 8 years ago during a money laundering case that touched the edge of the Valenti operation, and she had chosen then not to burn him. It was not a kindness. It was an investment, the kind that didn't pay dividends until you needed something done without a footprint. He opened the door in a bathrobe and squinted at her and said, "It's 8:40 in the morning." "I know what time it is, Benny. Let me in." He let her in. She gave him the last 10% of the money trail. The 2 shell entities, the movement pattern, the terminal account that had gone quiet 4 days before the gala. And she sat across from him at a table covered in takeout containers and watched him work. Because watching him work was faster than explaining what she needed. He had 3 laptops and a satellite connection he paid for with cash, and a mind that thought in numbers the way Elena thought in patterns. And within 40 minutes, he had the thing she'd been missing. "The terminal account," Benny said without looking up, "feeds from a holding structure registered in the Channel Islands that's been dormant for 9 years. But 9 years ago, it received one wire, large, from a primary account in the name of a private equity firm called Cassian Capital. He finally looked up. Cassian Capital dissolved 11 years ago. Its parent was a man named Aldous Wren, Elena said. Benny nodded slowly. The Wren money never fully disappeared after he died. There were accounts nobody found because nobody knew to look. Whoever is running this had access to Wren's financial infrastructure from the beginning. We're not talking about someone who built something new. We're talking about someone who inherited the old man's machine and ran it dark for a decade. Marcus Vale, Elena said. He was Wren's second. Benny turned back to his screen. Then he didn't just inherit the money. He inherited the contacts, the channels, the relationships Wren had built with half the coast over 30 years. He was quiet for a moment. Elena, if this man has had Wren's full network for 12 years and kept it invisible this whole time, you're not looking at a revenge operation. You're looking at something that's been growing underneath everything you built. He didn't spend 12 years waiting to hurt you. He spent 12 years building something large enough to replace you. The tire shop was quiet below them. Outside, a truck went past on the rail yard road, and the walls vibrated faintly, and Benny's 3 laptops hummed, and Elena sat with the thing he'd just said and felt it rearrange the landscape she'd been navigating since last night. Not revenge. Replacement. Vale didn't want to watch her burn. He wanted the empire. He wanted what Wren's collapse had denied him. The network, the alliances, the architecture of power that she had spent 11 years building on Valenti ground. The choice he'd offered her, Camille's life or the empire, wasn't designed to hurt her. It was designed to make her dismantle what she'd built with her own hands and hand it to him piece by piece, publicly, in front of the same families who'd spent a decade learning to respect her voice. To show every operator on the coast that Elena Valenti could be broken, that her loyalty ran only as deep as her own survival, and to fill the power vacuum she left behind with his own inherited machine. She sat with it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she said, I need a location. Vale is somewhere in this city in the next 72 hours. He needs to be near the network he's activating, near the families, near the communications infrastructure. He can't do this from a distance because this final stage requires him present. Where would someone with Wren's old contact structure go to ground in this city? Benny worked for another 20 minutes. She watched his hands. She drank the coffee he'd made, which was terrible, and she did not think about the gun in her waistband or the dead man in the cold room off the garage, or the 11 years of careful, clean-handed strategy she had just decided to stop pretending was still available to her. Wren had a property, Benny said finally, off-book, never surfaced in the estate proceedings. A warehouse-converted facility on the North Dock, registered to a shipping company that technically still exists because nobody ever told it to stop existing. If Vale has been running Wren's machine, he has access to Wren's property. He pulled a paper from the printer, still used a printer, Benny, which was either paranoia or nostalgia, and handed it across the table. I'd start there. Elena looked at the address. She looked at Benny. You didn't give me this. Give you what? He said and refilled his terrible coffee. The North Dock facility was a converted shipping warehouse, 4 stories, brick face, loading bays sealed on the ground level, no visible activity from the street. Elena sat in Ortega's car 2 blocks south and watched it for 22 minutes. She counted 3 separate position changes in the windows of the 3rd floor. Not random movement, deliberate, the specific rotation of a watching post. At least 2 on the water side from the reflection pattern off the bay. A vehicle in the loading bay's shadow that had been there long enough to leave a tire mark in the accumulated dust that she could see from this angle. 8 people inside minimum, possibly 12. She had Ortega, who had a bound arm and a handgun, and the stubbornness of a young man who'd already been through enough tonight that nothing was going to make it worse. And herself, with a P226 she hadn't fired in anger in 11 years, and a plan that was less a plan than a direction. I'm going in the front, she said. Ortega looked at her. Ma'am, I have to respectfully... I'm going in the front because they know I'm coming, she said. Vale wants this meeting. He engineered the whole week to get it, which means the 8 to 12 people inside that building are not going to shoot me in the loading bay because their boss needs me alive long enough to make the choice he built 12 years for. The threat to me is at the end of the meeting, not the beginning. She checked the P226 and reseated it. You're not coming in. You're going to sit on this car, and you're going to call Thomas Morrow's direct line. I'm going to give you the number, and you're going to tell him where I am. Not why, just where. And then you're going to wait. And if you don't come out, then Morrow will know where to start. Ortega's jaw worked. He was 26 years old, and he'd had his arm blown open and his colleague killed in the same morning, and he was sitting in a car outside a building he couldn't enter because a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours had decided his usefulness was better spent outside. Something in his face said he knew all of it was wrong, and he was going to let it happen anyway, because it was her call to make, and she was making it. Yes, ma'am, he said. She gave him Morrow's number. She got out of the car. She walked the 2 blocks to the loading bay entrance, and she put her hand flat against the steel door and pushed. It opened. Of course it opened. They were waiting for her. The interior of the building was cold and industrial and had been partially repurposed. Folding tables, monitors, the kind of operational setup that could be broken down and moved inside 2 hours. Generator-powered lighting. 4 armed men in the open space, positioned not to stop her but to track her, their weapons at low ready in the way of men who've been told to observe and not act. A staircase at the back leading up. A man at the base of the stairs who was not Reeves and was not Vale. He was large, bald, with the flat expression of a man who was paid specifically for his expression. He looked at Elena standing in the loading bay with her jacket over her waistband and said nothing and pointed at the stairs. She went up. The 3rd floor. Marcus Vale was standing at the window when she came through the door. She had not seen him in 14 years, and he had become, in those years, the kind of man that his younger self had been reaching toward. 60, lean, with gray hair cut close and a face that had organized itself around patience. He was wearing a plain dark jacket. No theater, no display. He looked like someone's retired accountant except for the eyes, which were alive in the specific way of a man who has been looking forward to this moment for a very long time. Camille sat in a chair to his left, one leg crossed over the other, a glass of something in her hand. Not restrained, not frightened. Exactly what Elena had told Dante she was. Collected. Elena, Vale said. He turned from the window. His voice was exactly what it had been on the radio. Unhurried, warm even, with the underlying quality of a man who understood that he held every card and could therefore afford courtesy. 14 years. You look tired. I imagine that's my fault. Sit down. Elena stayed standing. I'll stand. Suit yourself. He moved from the window to a chair and sat, because he could, because sitting while she stood was its own form of pressure. You found this place faster than I estimated. That's genuinely impressive. I gave you 3 days in my model. You gave me a week. I gave you a week publicly. In my own head, I had you here in 3 days. He smiled, the small, precise smile of a man validating a calculation. 20 hours. I need to adjust the model. Then let's not waste each other's time. Elena's eyes moved to Camille, one sweep, assessing, the woman looking back with something between satisfaction and curiosity. And back to Vale. You want the empire, not my life, not Dante's. You want the network I built, the alliances, the architecture. Ren's machine was a foundation, and you've been running it dark and you want to surface it inside what I built, absorb it, replace the Valenti name with your own. Vale tilted his head. 12 years of work and you crack it inside 20 hours. Yes, that's precisely it. The choice you offered is false, Elena said. You're not going to let Camille die. She's your asset. You need her intact to run the financial side of the operation you're planning to surface. The choice is real, Vale said, and the warmth went out of his voice like a lamp switching off, and what was underneath it was something cold and specific. You have it wrong about what I want, Elena. I don't just want the network. I want the authority. And those aren't the same thing. I can take the network by force if I'm willing to pay the cost. What I can't take by force is the reason the families actually listen. They listen because they believe the Valenti operation is led by someone with judgment, with history, with the specific trust that you spent 11 years building one relationship at a time. He leaned forward. I need you to give it to them, publicly. I need you to stand in front of every family that matters on this coast and tell them that you are stepping aside, that the Valenti structure is being consolidated under new leadership, and that the transition is voluntary. I need you to use the voice they trust to tell them to trust me. The room hummed with generator power and distant water. And if I don't, Elena said, then Camille goes, Vale said simply. And then I start on the families themselves. I've spent 4 years putting people inside every major operation on this coast. Not just yours. Morrow's people. Bertolucci's inner circle. 4 operations, 9 plants, all running off Ren's inherited infrastructure. I don't need your endorsement to take over, Elena. I just need you to understand that if you refuse, the alternative is a war that will cost more lives than you can afford to feel responsible for. Elena looked at him. Show her, Vale said. Camille reached into the bag beside her chair and put a folder on the table between them. Elena stepped forward and opened it. Photographs. 9 separate faces. Men she recognized, 4 of them personally known to her, 2 of them people she'd worked with directly in the last 3 years. Names and positions annotated underneath in clean type. Vale's plants, displayed like a hand of cards laid face up. Not boasting. Proving. Every one of them has instructions, Vale said. If they go a certain number of hours without a check-in from me, those instructions activate, simultaneously. 9 people in 9 different positions across 5 operations, all moving at once, in the middle of a moment when every family on the coast is already shaken from the gala. He let it sit. You've spent your whole career stopping wars before they start. You're looking at the beginning of one you cannot stop, unless you do what I'm asking. Elena closed the folder. She understood what she was standing in. Vale had not spent 12 years building toward a single night of violence. He'd spent 12 years building a situation that Elena's own nature would not let her refuse. He had taken the thing that separated her from every other operator in this world, her belief that some costs were too high, that a war between the families would burn people who hadn't chosen this life, and he had made that belief into the bars of her cage. He was right that she felt responsible. He had always been right about that. I need to think, she said. You have tonight, Vale said. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, at the Hargrove Grand Hotel. The same ballroom. I'll have the families assembled. A continuation of the gala billed as a show of solidarity after the attack. You'll stand up in front of them and you'll speak, and what you say will either be what I've asked you to say, or it will be the first shot of something that doesn't end until most of those rooms are empty. He stood. The meeting was over. He was telling her the meeting was over. You can go, Elena. Camille will see you out. Elena turned toward the door. One more thing, Vale said behind her. She stopped. Reeves sends his regards, Vale said. He told me, by the way, that night in your husband's entryway, he said when you looked at him, the look you gave him before Dante confronted him, he never saw it coming. He'd watched you for 4 years, and he never once thought he was made. The warmth came back into his voice, the terrible, patient warmth. That's the thing about you, Elena. You're the best I've ever seen at watching a room, but you can only watch what's in front of you. A pause. Drive safe. She walked down the stairs without looking back. She walked through the ground floor past the 4 armed men who tracked her to the loading bay door. She pushed it open and stepped out into the cold bay air and walked 2 blocks to Ortega's car and got in. And the door had barely closed when she said, "Start driving, not back to the estate, north." Ortega pulled out. North to where? I'll tell you when I know. Her hands were in her lap and they were not shaking, which surprised her until she understood that it was not calm and not control. It was something beyond both. The specific stillness of a person who had arrived at the exact moment their life required them to be unrecognizable to themselves. Vale had built a perfect trap. 12 years of perfect engineering. He'd taken her nature and used it as the architecture, her care, her patience, her preference for the clean move over the bloody one. He'd built a situation where every option that looked like her ended in his favor, which meant the only option that didn't was one that didn't look like her. She pulled out the secondary radio, channel 11. Morrow's line was in her head from the number she'd given Ortega. Morrow picked up on the second ring. "Elena," he said, cautious, alert, the sound of a man who'd been waiting to hear from her. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need a straight answer, not a political one." "Ask." "The 9 plants Vale's put in across the coast. If I could give you their names tonight, before they can receive an activation signal from Vale, how fast can you and Bertolucci move?" A silence. Then Morrow, in the flat, specific voice of a man running numbers. "If I trust the names, and Bertolucci trusts the names, 6 hours, maybe 5. "Good," Elena said. "I'm sending you a folder. Don't act until I say." "When do you say?" "Tomorrow," she said. 8 o'clock. In the Hargrove ballroom. When I stand up in front of every family on the coast." "And what are you going to say when you stand up?" Elena looked out the window at the cold city moving past, at the gray sky over the docks, at the shape of a war she had spent 11 years preventing, and had just decided she was not going to prevent the way Vale needed her to. Vale had built a trap for the woman who watched the room and stayed clean and counted the cost, and always chose the move that preserved the most. She was going to walk into that ballroom tomorrow as someone else. "I'm going to say exactly what he told me to say," Elena said into the radio. "Right up until the moment I don't." She clicked off. Ortega drove north. The city went past, and the radio crackled once and went silent. And in the car, Elena Valenti sat with 9 names in her head and a gun in her waistband and the specific, lucid calm of a woman who has finally stopped choosing between who she was and who the situation required, and let the two things become the same. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, Marcus Vale was going to learn the one thing 12 years of studying Elena Marcelli Valenti had not taught him. He had studied the woman who watched. He had never met the one who moved. She did not sleep. Ortega drove her back to the estate at 11 that night, and she sat in the office until 4 in the morning with the 9 names from Vale's folder laid out in front of her. Not the photographs, she'd memorized those. And she built the sequence the way she built everything, from the inside out, starting with the most fragile point and working toward the load-bearing ones. She drank 3 cups of coffee and ate half a piece of bread someone left on the counter and did not notice either. Dante came to the office at 2. He stood in the doorway and looked at the monitors and at his wife sitting in the cold light of them, and he did not ask questions. He went to the kitchen and made more coffee and brought it back and set it beside her elbow and pulled a chair to the corner of the room and sat in it. He didn't speak. He didn't offer. He just stayed, the way you stay with someone who is carrying something too heavy to carry alone, but cannot yet put it down. At 3:30, Elena said, without looking up, "The announcement at the gala, the night of. Did you want to do it?" A long pause. "No," Dante said. "I didn't want to do it. I'd been pulled toward it for months. Camille and Reeves suggesting it, and the way things had been between us, and..." He stopped. "I thought I wanted to. That night I thought it felt like power. About 45 minutes later I understood what I'd actually done. Before the attack. Before the attack. You were standing across the room and you didn't react, not one muscle, and I felt..." His voice worked around something. "I felt like I'd hit a wall I didn't know was there." Elena looked up from the monitors. "Because I didn't fall apart. Because you looked at me like I was a problem you were reassessing." He met her eyes. "Which I was. Which I deserved to be." He leaned forward in the chair, elbows on his knees, hands loose. "I've been thinking about the thing you said. About Ren. About choosing yourself." He paused. "I've been thinking that you've spent 11 years choosing me and the Empire and everything that came with it, and not once in 11 years have I ever asked what it cost you. Not once." Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the monitors. "It cost me Ren," she said, "and before that it cost me a version of myself that I wasn't sorry to lose, and then it cost me the thing I was most afraid to lose, which is the belief that I could stay clean." She set down the coffee. "After tomorrow I won't be clean anymore, not the way I've been defining it." "Elena, I know what I'm doing, Dante. I've known since I picked up the gun. I'm not asking for permission, and I'm not asking you to feel good about it." She turned to face him fully. "What I'm asking is whether you trust me enough to do exactly what I tell you tomorrow without knowing why until it's already done." He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then here's what you're going to do." She told him, All of it. The sequence, the timing, the specific things she needed from him and from the security men and from Thomas Morrow. She talked for 30 minutes, and he listened the way he listened to nothing else, with the full weight of his attention. And when she finished, he sat quietly for a moment. If Vale's people get to Morrow's before we neutralize all 9, he said, it triggers anyway. Yes. And if it triggers, then it triggers. And Morrow and Bertolucci deal with the fires in their own houses, and Vale has started a war he doesn't have the infrastructure to finish because I've already pulled the ground out from under his network. He wins a battle and loses the campaign. She looked at her husband. But he won't get to trigger it because I'm not going to give him the chance. Dante was quiet. You're going to walk into that room tomorrow, he said slowly, and you're going to stand in front of everyone, and you're going to look like you're doing what he wants. Until I'm not. Another silence. He's going to have guns in that room, Dante said. His people. Inside the Hargrove ballroom with the families assembled. If it goes wrong, it won't go wrong. Elena. His voice broke open just at the edge. If it goes wrong. She looked at him. She let him see that she'd already sat with that, already turned it over and set it down, already made peace with the specific arithmetic of a situation where no option was without cost. She let him see all of it, and she watched him receive it, and she watched him choose to be the thing she needed tomorrow instead of the thing he was afraid to lose tonight. It won't go wrong, she said again. Gentler this time. He nodded once, and that was all. Ashkit. She was dressed and ready by 6. Black again. The same fundamental severity as the gala. Deliberate, because she was walking into the same room, and the contrast between who she'd been standing against the north wall that night and who walked in today was a message she intended the room to receive without being told. She put the P226 at her hip, inside the waistband where the jacket covered it, and she stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom for exactly 10 seconds. The woman looking back was not the woman who had stood against the north wall of the Hargrove ballroom 2 nights ago. That woman had been watching. This one had already decided. She walked out. The Hargrove Grand Hotel looked different at 7:50 in the morning. No chandeliers lit, no orchestra. The lobby marble was clean, but the air still carried the specific chemical memory of a space that had been forensically processed. The gala crime scene cleared, but the ghost of it hanging in the ventilation. Security staff on the doors were a combination of hotel people and family security from at least 3 different operations. Elena recognized 4 faces from 2 nights ago, and they recognized her. They let her through without a word. The ballroom had been set with a different configuration. Chairs arranged in the round, a central open floor, no podium. Vale's choice. No elevation, no structural authority, everyone equal, everyone watching everyone else. The specific geometry of a room designed to make a single speaker's position feel chosen rather than assigned. It was a thoughtful touch. She noted it and filed it. 41 people in the room when she entered. Heads of operations, senior lieutenants, the fixed points of the coast's power structure in a morning that was wrong enough to have them all in the same room on short notice. Thomas Morrow was against the right wall, and their eyes met when she came in, and she held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. The signal they'd agreed on, the confirmation that his people had been moving since 5 this morning with the 9 names she'd sent the night before. He gave her nothing visible in return. A man who'd survived 63 years in this world knew how to hold his face. Felix Bertolucci was near the left wall, and he looked like he hadn't slept. He was watching Elena with the expression of a man who had been told something was happening today and had decided to believe it only when he saw it. Dante was near the back, with 2 of the security men Elena had cleared. Not Reeves's people. 2 she'd promoted herself from the outer ring 3 years ago, and whose files she knew by heart. He was composed. He was exactly what she'd asked him to be. Vale was in the center of the open floor. He stood with Camille slightly behind his left shoulder, collected, composed, in a gray suit that was understated in a way that spoke of confidence rather than modesty. He looked at Elena entering, and his face did the small, warm thing that it did, the precise smile of a man whose model had just been confirmed. She was here. She'd come. He'd expected her at 20 hours, and she'd arrived at 20, and everything that followed was going to proceed exactly as designed. He believed that all the way until she opened her mouth. "Good morning," Elena said, and her voice carried the room the way it had carried Channel 11 2 nights ago. Not loud, not performed, just precise enough that the room organized itself around it. She moved to the center of the floor and stopped 12 feet from Vale, and the room settled. "Most of you know who I am," she said. "Some of you know me better than others. What all of you know is that the Valenti organization has operated on this coast for 20 years, and that for the last 11 of those years, the reason it survived is me. No apology in it, no pride either, just fact, delivered at the temperature of fact. Not because I say so, because you've seen it. You've sat across tables from decisions I made that kept your operations intact when they shouldn't have been. You've benefited from intelligence I developed and threats I neutralized before they reached you, because the stability of this network serves everyone in this room." She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. 2 nights ago, someone attacked this building and 2 men died on Valenti property. This man, she turned slightly, indicating Vale without looking away from the room, as though he were an exhibit rather than a threat. Marcus Vale. He ran the machine that attacked the gala. He has spent 4 years planting people inside your organizations. He has spent 12 years building toward a moment where he could walk into a room with all of you and demand a legitimacy transfer at the point of a loaded situation. The room was very still. Vale said calmly, "I'd let her finish. She's going to endorse the transition. She just needs to arrive there her own way." He said it to the room, not to her, the specific move of a man confident enough in his position to absorb the attack and let the audience see him absorb it. "He's right that I'm going to finish," Elena said. "He's wrong about where I'm going." She reached into her jacket. Every armed person in the room moved, not toward her, but in the specific tensing of bodies that recalibrate the landscape when a hand goes toward a weapon. Vale's 2 men, behind him and to his right, both shifted weight. Elena's hand came out of the jacket, not with the P226, but with a folded set of papers, and she held them up so the room could see they were papers, and the tensing eased. 9 names, she said. 9 people that Vale inserted into your operations over 4 years, using Aldous Wren's inherited financial infrastructure and communication channels. As of 5 this morning, 7 of those 9 are in custody, held by the respective operations they were planted in. She looked at the room. Morrow's house is clean. Bertolucci's house is clean. 3 of the Gulf operators, your people are clean. She paused. Vale came to this room today believing he had 9 loaded weapons pointed at everyone here. He has 2. And those 2, she looked directly at Vale for the first time since she'd begun. Those 2 are going to stand down in about 40 seconds. Vale's face had done something she hadn't seen it do in the North Dock building or on the radio or in any version of him she'd constructed over the last 2 days. It had gone very still. Not calm. Still. The specific stillness of a man whose model has encountered a variable he did not account for and is running, fast, to find the place where it breaks down. "You were watching Morrow," Vale said. His voice was still even. He was good. "Last night, when you left my building, you went to Morrow." "I went to Morrow 2 nights ago," Elena said. "Before I came to you. Before I even knew the address. I called him from the car on the way to Benny Solis, and I told him to move on the names the moment I sent them, because I knew what I was going to find at Solis's, and I knew what you were going to show me when I got to the dock." She looked at him. "I didn't figure out your 9 plants when I saw the folder. I already knew about 8 of them. I've been tracking anomalies in the coast communication patterns for 3 years, Vale. Not just Reeves, all of it. I didn't know they traced to you. I didn't know the source, but I had the shapes of them." She let it settle. "You've been studying me for 12 years, but you started 12 years ago. I've been building this specific capability for 3. The version of me you built your plan against doesn't exist anymore. You were 12 years late." Something cracked in Vale's stillness. Not outward, not visible to anyone who didn't know how to read a face the way Elena read a face. But she saw it. The hairline fracture running through the confidence, The specific moment a man understands that the ground he was standing on is not the ground he thought. You still have a problem, Vale said, and now he turned away from Elena and toward the room, because the room was still the room, and the room had not yet declared itself. Whatever she's done with my people in your organizations, I have resources you haven't found. I have capital you haven't traced. I have Ren's network, and you can clean your own houses, but you cannot clean mine. And if she ends me here today, I've left instructions that activate without me. He was not threatening now. He was recalibrating, which was more dangerous, because a man who can recalibrate in real time while losing is a man who has reserves. Walk away from this, Elena. Take what you've done with the 9 plants, call it a victory, and walk away. What you cannot do is end me in this room without paying a price that reaches every person sitting here. It was not an empty play. Elena knew it wasn't empty because Vale did not make empty plays. He had something left. Maybe 2 things, maybe 1, maybe just enough. She could see Morrow measuring it from the wall. She could see Bertolucci's jaw tight. She could see 41 people in a room deciding whether what they'd just witnessed was enough, or whether the cost of the next step was worth it. She could walk away. Vale was right that she could walk away. Take the clean win. 7 of 9 plants neutralized, Vale's network exposed, his operation gutted in a single morning, and leave him in the room with whatever reserves he had left, diminished but alive, knowing that she had looked at the cost of finishing it and decided it was too high. 11 years ago she would have. 2 days ago she would have. She looked at Dante standing at the back of the room. She found his face and she let him find hers, and what passed between them in that 2 seconds was not a plan and not a signal and not a piece of the sequence she'd built overnight. It was the simpler thing. The thing that had been damaged and rebuilt in the space of 48 hours into something neither of them had had before. She looked back at Vale. You left instructions, she said. Activated if you're taken or killed. That's the remaining leverage. She nodded slowly, as though confirming something to herself. Tell me how long after activation before they execute. Vale's eyes narrowed. Why? Because if it's more than 40 minutes, you have no leverage, Elena said. Because Reeves is in federal custody as of 6 this morning. She watched Vale's face. She watched it. Ortega had a contact, she said quietly. Not mine. His own, a federal investigator he'd been working with on a separate matter. Ortega made a call at 5 this morning, an hour before I sent the names tomorrow. Reeves gave them enough for a warrant inside 2 hours because Reeves, when he finally understood that Vale had burned him as a disposable asset, decided that his own survival was worth more than loyalty to a man who'd already erased him. She paused. Your extraction team pulled him out. They kept him dark, but they delivered him to a location where Ortega's contact was already watching, because last night I told Ortega exactly where that location would be. She held Vale's eyes. The person your instructions run through, the communications relay, it's in federal hands, has been for 3 hours. Your dead man's switch is dead. The room was absolutely silent. Vale stood in the center of it, and the stillness in his face was different now. Not the recalibrating stillness, but the final kind. The stillness of a man who has run his model to the last variable and found that the answer is not what he built his life around. He looked at Elena Valenti for a long moment. You knew, he said. You knew before you came to the dock last night. I knew you'd show me the folder, she said. I needed you to believe I didn't have the names yet, because if you thought I had them, you'd activate immediately and burn the relay before I could get to it. So I let you show me. I let you believe I was standing in your building being beaten. She let the room hear every word of it. And then I left and I called Morrow and I sent Ortega to his federal contact and I went home and I slept 4 hours. She had not slept, but Vale didn't need to know that. 12 years, Vale said. The words came out of something hollow, and for the first time she heard the thing underneath all the patience and all the engineering. The grief that had driven it, the old man's second. The man who had believed in something and watched it destroyed and spent his whole remaining life trying to rebuild the architecture of a world where that destruction was answered. She heard it, and she was not unmoved by it, because she understood it better than he knew. 12 years for this. 12 years of running Ren's machine, Elena said, and her voice was quieter now, the courtroom tone dropping into something closer to honest. But Ren's machine wasn't yours, Vale. It was his. You've spent 12 years maintaining something a dead man built and calling it your own future. She held his gaze. I know what that looks like from the inside, because I spent 6 months in Ren's operation doing the same thing, carrying someone else's structure and telling myself it was what I was building toward. She paused. And then I walked away, and it nearly killed me to do it, and then I built my own. Something in Vale's face moved. She couldn't name it. It was too complicated and too old, and it had been building for longer than she'd known him, and it was not her to name. But the fight went out of him. Not dramatically. Not a collapse. Nothing like Dante's rawness in the office. It was quieter than that. The specific deflation of a man whose engine has been running at maximum for 12 years and has just had the fuel cut. He stood in the center of the Hargrove ballroom, and he looked smaller than he had at the window of the North Dock warehouse, and the room full of the most dangerous people on the eastern seaboard watched him do it. I'll take him, Morrow said from the wall. It was not a question. Morrow walked forward with 2 of his men, and Vale looked at them coming and did not reach for the weapon Elena could see at his hip, because reaching for it was its own kind of admission that the model had failed and the game was done. And Marcus Vale, whatever else he was, had enough pride left to not make that move. He let Morrow's men take him by the arms, and they walked him toward the back of the ballroom, and he did not look at Elena again. Camille looked at her. Camille had not moved from Vale's left shoulder through any of it. She stood now in the center of the open floor with her gray suit and her careful composure, and she looked at Elena with the specific expression of a woman reassessing every calculation she'd made in the last 3 years, and finding that the architecture had been wrong from the foundation. He recruited you after Dante, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Camille's chin came up slightly. Before. 2 months before Reeves brought me to Dante's attention. And you believed in what he was building. I believed in what he said it would become. Camille's voice was flat and even, the affect of a woman who had decided that the only thing left available to her was honesty. He was very convincing about the future. He always was. Yes, Elena said. He was. She looked at Camille for another moment. You're going to talk to the federal investigator. Everything. The financial structure, the network, the channels Ren built. All of it. You know more of it than Reeves does. And in return, I tell the right people that you cooperated fully and immediately. Elena held her eyes. Which you did, right now. This is the immediately. Camille looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then she nodded, once, and one of Morrow's men who had stayed back came and took her by the arm, and she went without resistance and did not look at Dante as she passed him. The room exhaled. Not loudly. These were not people who exhaled loudly. But the pressure that had been in the air since Elena walked in, the collective held breath of 41 people deciding whether what they were witnessing was the end of something or the beginning of something worse. That pressure released, and what came in after it was something quieter and more complicated. The specific atmosphere of a room full of dangerous people who have just watched someone do something they could not have done themselves, and who are deciding how to feel about owing that fact to a woman they spent years looking through. Bertolucci crossed the room to Elena and stood in front of her and said nothing for a moment. He was 68 years old and had the face of a man who had buried more friends than he could comfortably count. Your husband told my people you built the protection network, he said. The whole thing, not just the Valenti side, all of it. Some of it, Elena said. More than some. Bertolucci's eyes were steady on her. My son, the boy, 14, at the gala. You knew where he was in the dark. He was standing by the 3rd pillar on the east side. He'd moved there when the music changed. It was quieter. I'd seen him there 20 minutes before the lights went out. Bertolucci looked at her. Then he put out his hand. She shook it. It was the handshake of a man who was not thanking her for a service. It was the handshake of a man acknowledging an equal, and the specific weight of what that cost him. A man of his generation and his history acknowledging a woman that way in a room like this, she felt it, and she did not make a performance of receiving it. What happens next, Bertolucci said, with the Valenti operation, with the structure? It holds, Elena said. The architecture holds. The alliances hold. Everything Vale was trying to absorb remains exactly where it is. She looked at the room. What changes is that the people in this room know, going forward, who built the wall that's been keeping everyone here standing, not because I need the credit. She let her eyes move across the faces she knew and the ones she didn't. The 41 people who had come to this room expecting one outcome and would leave it carrying something different. Because the next time someone tries to come through it, you should know whose voice to listen to. There was no applause. That wasn't the room. What there was a specific quality of silence that was not emptiness but recognition, and she had been in enough rooms to know the difference. It took 4 more hours to finish it. The federal contact, a compact, serious woman named Vasquez who had been Ortega's handler for 18 months on a completely separate matter, and who Elena had spoken to exactly once at 5 that morning for 11 minutes, arrived at the Hargrove with 2 vehicles and began the procedural machinery of folding a 12-year criminal infrastructure into a federal case. Elena sat across from Vasquez in a hotel conference room for 40 minutes and laid out the financial architecture she'd traced from the Wren accounts to Vale's operation, the 9 names, the communication relay, the mechanism of the Gala attack. She laid it out the way she laid out everything, clean, sequenced, nothing extraneous, and Vasquez listened and asked 3 questions and wrote down 2 things and said, when Elena was done, if half this holds up in discovery, this is a career case. It'll hold up, Elena said. How are you this sure? Because I built it to hold up, Elena said. I've been building it to hold up for 3 years. I just didn't know whose case it was going to be. Vasquez looked at her for a moment. Then she said carefully, there are going to be questions about the Valenti operation itself, about your own role, about the nature of the information you've gathered and how you gathered it. I know, Elena said. You understand what I'm saying. I understand exactly what you're saying. Elena held the federal investigator's eyes. Ask your questions. I'll answer what I can answer. There are things I won't give you, and you know which things those are, and you're going to decide whether the 12-year network I just handed you is worth the things I won't give. My guess is it is. My guess is we both walk out of this room knowing what our limits are, and neither of us pushes past them. She waited. Is my guess right? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. Your guess is right, she said. Elena nodded. She stood. She shook Vasquez's hand and walked out of the conference room and into the corridor and stood for a moment with her back against the wall and her eyes closed and took 3 long, slow breaths with no one watching. Then she found Dante. He was in the lobby. He was sitting in one of the chairs they put in hotel lobbies to look welcoming, and he was leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them. And when she came around the corner, he looked up and the look on his face was the one she'd been cataloging for 11 years, but had never quite seen in this form. Not relief exactly, and not pride, something underneath both of those that had no efficient name. She sat in the chair beside him. Neither of them spoke for a minute. Reeves, Dante said finally, the federal thing. Ortega really had a contact. Ortega really had a contact. I found out about it 3 months ago when I reviewed his communication logs. I kept it filed in case it was ever useful. She looked at her hands in her lap. 3 months ago, I thought it might be useful someday in a general way. Last night, I was very glad I'd kept the file. Dante made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. You keep files on everything. I keep files on everything. He was quiet. Then, the 9 plants. You said you'd been tracking 8 of them for 3 years. You had 8 and you didn't know where they were from. I knew they were from the same source. I didn't know the source. She turned her head to look at him. If I'd known it was Vale, I'd have found him 3 years ago. But all I had was a pattern with no origin. I was building toward it. Building toward it, he repeated. And at the same time building the protection network and running the family's security infrastructure. And he stopped. He looked at his hands. And living with a man who announced his girlfriend to a room full of crime lords. Yes, Elena said. How long, Dante said. How long did you know I was drifting? She thought about what to say. She thought about the careful answer and the true answer, and whether, in this corridor, after this week, she still had the energy to prefer the careful one. 3 years, she said. He absorbed it. He sat with it the way she sat with the hard things, turned it over, looked at the underside, set it down carefully. And you stayed, he said. I stayed. Why? She looked at the marble floor of the Hargrove lobby, at the crack in the second tile to the left of her shoe that probably no one else had noticed, at the specific ordinary imperfection of a surface that tried to look flawless. Because the empire was worth it, she said. And because I love you, and because those two things got tangled up in a way I stopped being able to separate. She looked up at him. And because I knew that the drift wasn't permanent. I know you better than you know yourself, Dante. I've known you better than you know yourself since the 3rd year. The drift was vanity and complacency, and you had them the way powerful men always get them, and it was corrigible. Corrigible, he said softly. Fixable, she said. If it was broken enough to need fixing. He looked at her. And was it? She held his gaze. Ask me in a year. Something in his face, not a smile, but the beginning of the possibility of one, shifted. A year, he said. A year, she said. They sat in the lobby for another few minutes in the particular quiet of two people who have said the real things and have nothing left to perform. Then Dante stood and put his hand out, not to shake, but simply to hold, and she took it, and they walked out of the Hargrove Grand Hotel into the cold November afternoon. 3 months passed. The federal case moved through its early machinery quietly, the way federal cases did when the evidence was clean and the cooperating witnesses were motivated. Reeves provided testimony that locked the financial architecture in place. Camille provided the communication records and the network contacts and 12 months of logged interactions with Vale that proved the operation's scope. The case became, as Vasquez had predicted, a career case, and Vasquez had the grace never to call Elena about it again, except once, in January, to confirm a single point of financial record, and Elena answered the question and hung up. Vale was held without bail. Elena read the filing once, and then filed it and did not read it again. The 9 plants, 7 in custody, 2 who had fled and been found within the week, were extracted from the coast's operations cleanly enough that the families held. Morrow's operation lost a senior lieutenant and rebuilt around the loss within a month. Bertolucci's inner circle was restructured with people Bertolucci chose himself, without input or suggestion from Elena, which was the right way to do it. She told him so, and he said he knew. Ortega was promoted. He did not come work directly under Elena. She offered, and he declined politely, because he had his own trajectory and he knew it, and she respected that more than his acceptance would have given her. She kept his number. She expected she would use it again someday. Delgado's family received what they needed to receive in the way these things were always handled: a number in an account, a phone call, an absence of questions. Elena made the call herself, to his wife, who was 28 and had a son she didn't yet have words for this with, and she listened more than she spoke, and she did not make promises about what it had meant because it was not her grief to define. She stayed on the phone for 20 minutes, and she said, at the end, only that he had been the best of them that night, and she meant it, and the wife said thank you and hung up, and Elena sat with the phone in her hand for a moment before she put it down. The Valenti Foundation Gala was rescheduled for February. Different venue, tighter coordination. The committee asked Elena to chair the security review, and she said yes and meant something different by yes than she had the first time. Dante trained every morning at 5. He called her in the evenings when he traveled. He did not revert to what he had been in the 3 years before the gala, and she watched for it without letting him see her watching, and by the 3rd month she stopped watching as often. Not because she trusted that people don't revert, she was too old and had seen too much to believe that, but because the specific quality of his attention had changed in a way she couldn't reduce to performance, and she had built her entire career on the ability to tell the difference. In January, on a Thursday evening, she was in the office going through a communication audit when Dante came in and leaned in the doorway and said, "Come to dinner. I have the audit. The audit will be there in an hour. So will you." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he said, "Elena, come to dinner." She looked at him. At the doorway he filled and the quiet way he was asking, and the specific patience in it that was new, not the patience of a man who had performed learning from consequences, but the patience of a man who had actually been changed by them, who had sat with the cost of himself for 3 months and come out the other side of it carrying the weight differently. She saved the audit. She closed the laptop. She came to dinner. They sat at the table in the kitchen because the dining room was too large for 2 people who were not performing anything, and they ate the food that had been left by the cook, and they drank a wine she'd opened 2 weeks ago that was still good, and they talked about small things, the foundation, a property matter in the city, a book she'd been reading, a story Ortega had told her about his mother. And none of it was important, and all of it was. At some point, Dante said, without preamble, "Do you think Ren deserved it?" She set down her glass. "What made you ask that?" "I've been thinking about it for 3 months." He turned the wine glass in his fingers. "You made a decision about a man's life. You decided to let him fall instead of warning him. And you've been carrying that as a moral debt ever since, and it's the debt that Vale was trying to collect." He looked up. "I want to know if you think you were wrong." She thought about it, the real version of the thought, not the refined one she'd been carrying for 14 years. "Ren was going to fall," she said. "The war was coming whether or not I warned him. I know that now, the way I knew it then. The question was whether I went down with him or not." She looked at her hands on the table. "I chose not to go down with him. And 3 people died in the collapse who might not have died if I'd stayed and fought with him. And I have never found a clean answer to what I owe them." She looked up. "That's not a question that has a resolution, Dante. You carry it or you put it down and become someone who put it down. I've been carrying it. I'll keep carrying it. It keeps me honest." Dante was quiet. "It kept you honest with me," he said. "You could have ended things a dozen times in 3 years. You had more than enough to justify it. You didn't because I knew what I'd done to Ren," she said. "Because walking away from the person you chose is something I know the shape of, and I was not willing to do it the same way twice. Not when there was a version where we didn't have to." She paused. "There's a version where we don't have to." Dante set down his glass. "I know," he said. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the grounds were dark, and somewhere in the dark, the security men Elena had chosen were walking the perimeter, and the house was as safe as she could make it, which was safer than it looked, which was how she preferred things to be. She picked up her wine. He picked up his. They finished dinner without resolving anything that couldn't be resolved, which was most things, and left standing the things that could, which was enough. In the spring, the Valenti Foundation donated to 4 children's hospitals along the coast. Elena reviewed the grants. She changed 2 of the allocations to better match the actual gaps in pediatric care versus the gaps that looked better in photographs, and nobody overruled her, and the money went where it was needed. She did not attend the press event. She was in the office, auditing a communication anomaly she'd noticed 2 weeks earlier in a pattern that didn't yet have a shape. She made a file. She started watching. The woman who had been publicly abandoned in a ballroom, who had picked up a dead man's radio and commanded a security team through a war that was never supposed to be her war, who had spent 11 years building a wall between the world she lived in and the kind of damage that world could do. That woman did not become someone else after the storm. She became the fullest version of herself, the version that the watching had been preparing for, the version that understood that the clean hands and the loaded gun and the patient strategy and the decision to move were not different kinds of people, but one person at different moments in the same long game. The empire did not belong to whoever had the most pride. It never had. It belonged to whoever understood, clearly and without sentimentality, what the empire actually was. Not power, not fear, not the ability to raise a glass in a room full of dangerous people and have them look at you. It was trust, built in the dark, in small increments over years, by a person willing to do the unglamorous work of holding things together when everything wanted to fall apart. Elena Marcelli Valenti sat in the office in the April light, with a new file open on the screen and a cup of coffee at her elbow, and the specific quiet alertness of a woman who has stopped pretending she is not exactly who she is. And she got back to work.